To welcome all.
Oh, here's Ginger.
I'd like to welcome all of you to the new view and to today's presentation that is going to be given by Marilyn. Marilyn, could you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about how you came to be doing what you're doing, and then take it away.
Thank you, Nori. My name is Marilyn Langlois, and I'm a member of the TRANSCEND International Network for Peaceful Conflict Transformation. The title of my talk today is Heal the World, Alternative U.S. and Domestic Policy. This is based on a presentation I gave at two TRANSCEND symposiums. Both were organized by Norwegian peace researcher and mediator Johan Galtung. One was in August of 2009 in Jondahl, Norway, attended also by people from various countries who all gave talks about ideas for alternative policies that could promote world peace. And the other one was in March of 2011 at the University of North Carolina in Greensboro. In fact, Diane Perlman, who's here today, is also a TRANSCEND member, and she was at that Greensboro conference. That one was focused more on alternative policies for the countries in North America that would be more conducive to peace. So what I'm going to talk about today may in some aspects seem a bit out of date, but I think you'll find that overall, everything I say is still incredibly relevant for us today in 2023. The topics are going to include the following: what we want in the future, what went wrong in the past, what we need to do now, how will we pay for it, and then I'll give some practical examples. And before I begin, I want to just dedicate today's presentation to two people I admire greatly. One is my friend and mentor, Congolese peace activist and freedom fighter, Ernest Wamba Diawamba, a founder of the Otabenga Center for Peace, Healing, and Dignity in Kinshasa. Professor Wamba died tragically 3 years ago in 2020. And also to a Haitian leader in the Lavalas movement, Lovinsky Pierre-Antoine, whom I had the honor of meeting on a couple of my visits to Haiti. Lovinsky did not hesitate to call out the abuses of empire on his people, and he named names. For this, he paid the ultimate price and was disappeared in 2007 and has not been seen since. So he's presumed dead. So Ernest Wamba Diawamba and Lovinsky Pierre-Antoine, presente. So now let's heal the world with, here's an alternative U.S. foreign and domestic policy. What we want in the future. The United States herewith commits to partnering as one member in the family of nearly 200 nation states in the world, and to participating in global cooperation, not domination. We embrace the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and commit to ensuring that the basic needs of all residents are met, including education, housing, healthcare, dignified employment, old age pensions, cultural and recreational pursuits, and meaningful participation in communities, as well in all decisions that affect their lives. Furthermore, the U.S. recognizes the right of every country to chart its own course in the best interest of its citizens without hostile interference from outside. We acknowledge the past harms caused by U.S. foreign policies and aim to participate in repairing the damage done while listening to those who have suffered the most. We envision a world where all humans can find ways to share knowledge and share the resources of the earth fairly, resolve conflicts nonviolently, and find creative, mutually beneficial solutions to problems that arise. While technological advances expand our potential for improved living standards, these must be tempered by a solid foundation in values that reinforce the inherent goodness of the human spirit. A concrete example of the type of values embodied in the type of human community we aspire to attain can be found in this book, The Healing Wisdom of Africa, Finding Life Purpose Through Nature, Ritual, and Community by Malidoma Patrice Somé. In it, Malidoma depicts the age-old culture of the Dagara people of Western Africa in what is now Burkina Faso. In Dagara tradition, life revolves around the strength of the community, supportive relationships, and frequent communion with the wisdom of the ancestors. All people are viewed as being born with gifts to give to society as they grow into adulthood, and each child is loved, coached, supported, and mentored by parents, elders, and other caring adults. Resources are shared equitably so that everyone's basic needs are met. Conflicts are addressed through supportive community rituals, not unlike community mediation panels, which have taken a tiny foothold in the US. Misdeeds that cause suffering are met with intense counseling and redirection by elders, rather than a rigid and punitive criminal justice system. Labor that is necessary to feed, house, and sustain community members is embarked on communally, but only after first taking the time to build collective energy and enthusiasm for the tasks at hand. Creative expressions in various art forms, whether music, dance, poetry, painting, or sculpture, are infused throughout daily life and rituals. No one is alone or isolated because there is a recognition of how good it feels to accept the fact that people are interdependent on each other and closely connected to those who have gone before and those who are not yet born. The Dagara world has, of course, been compromised in present times from colonial contact. And what Malidoma describes is not exactly how they are living today, but rather a memory of the past and a future vision of life in supportive communities. This vision expresses the ancient African concept of Ubuntu, I am because we are. Hence, this shall be the new motto of the US, replacing in God we trust. Okay, so Ubuntu, I am because we are. What went wrong in the past? Knowledge of how to live in supportive communities has been undermined as humans began responding to stress by exploiting the Earth's resources indiscriminately and institutionalizing both the grossly unequal allocation of those resources and the use of lethal means to enforce this unequal resource allocation. At the present time, the world is a far different distance from fully implementing the vision of a dignified life for all. Communities like those described by Malidoma, though likely common in early human history, are exceedingly rare at present. People all over the world face massive suffering from direct and structural violence, alienation, stress, destruction of human habitats. Previous US policy has led to much of the suffering and devastation. Therefore, it is time to take a completely new direction. I won't enumerate here the specific US policies of the past and the negative consequences over the years, but these will be revealed in great detail during the course of the reconciliation processes that will likely arise from implementation of the new overarching policy outlined in this proposal. A persistent root cause of much of the suffering in the world today is the growing inequality between the rich and poor, which is occasionally mentioned, but rarely viewed by those in power as an unacceptable trend. Though the US is considered to be one of the so-called richest countries, income inequality in the US is immense. Haiti, seen as one of the so-called poorest countries, also has gross income inequalities, with the masses of desperately poor and a small number of obscenely wealthy elites. Wars are almost always fought over the control of resources, when carefully analyzed, beyond the propaganda and the manufactured cultural conflicts. Social epidemiologists Richard Wilkerson and Kate Pickett wrote in this book, The Spirit Level, Why Greater Equality Makes Society Stronger, summarizing research that demonstrates the close correlation between income inequality and a range of social ills that result in great human suffering. Countries that distribute their income most equally have the highest quality of life. The more equal countries have greater life expectancy, lower infant mortality, better child well-being, less obesity, lower homicide rates, fewer school dropouts, lower teen pregnancy, higher civic trust, less drug abuse, lower rates of imprisonment, and lower rates of mental illness. Among the so-called rich countries, the US is the least equal, with resulting poor outcomes in all of the above social indicators. Policies that lessen income inequality would clearly lead to greater social well-being. For example, raising the minimum wage, improving worker pensions, strengthening labor unions, implementing progressive tax reform, and fully funding education and healthcare for all, and generally guaranteeing a minimum standard of living for everyone. The history of US foreign and domestic policy, however, has for the most part discouraged such policies, with small gains being made only after sustained pressure from the grassroots. It is exceedingly difficult to persuade the wealthy to let go of their wealth for the benefit of all, including themselves. Rich people, even those who give a portion of their money to charity, tend to cling tenaciously to their right to own and control often an astronomically greater amount of resources than the average person. Wealthy elites also often take great pains to divide people and keep them fighting amongst themselves rather than uniting in demanding greater equality. So, what we need to do now. The initial thrust of this policy is not an immediate and radical distribution of wealth, a highly contentious and controversial undertaking, but rather to focus on health and healing based on empathy. Healing pain and relieving suffering are widely seen as acceptable and even commendable endeavors. If we can systematically and comprehensively heal the pain of social ills, income inequality will melt away in the process. Heal the world, a phrase used by the late Michael Jackson in one of his most popular songs, is now the theme of US policy from now on. Author Alice Walker has emphasized repeatedly that we need massive healing. According to author and Pan-Africanist Aikwe Armah, healing is a social process about reviving connections with the past, present, and future generations, and restoring balance, as symbolized by the female deity Ma'at. Healing is a prerequisite to achieving the world we envision and creating the kind of supportive communities depicted by Malidoma. An additional benefit is healing is that it will bring about true security, not the false security of weapons. As the pastor Reverend Shoemake in my hometown of Richmond repeatedly states, hurt people hurt people. I'll say that again, hurt people hurt people. If people are surrounded by a loving community and their pain is recognized and addressed, any motivation to lash out against others will dissipate. Because the US has been responsible for so much suffering in the past, we have a responsibility to take a strong stand in articulating a new direction that we will commit to. All other nations and communities of nations are invited to consider adopting a similar policy to maximize the beneficial effects for everyone, and we are willing to dialogue about such a universal policy direction and what it could look like. To get this conversation started, we proposed two guiding principles in the US policy of healing, inspired by the late physician and anthropologist Paul Farmer. Number one, wherever the US has a presence, the highest priority shall be to relieve pain and suffering in any form. Number two, the best possible treatment for any form of pain must be available to all people equally. Let's look more closely at these two principles. Number one, wherever the US has a presence, the highest priority shall be to relieve pain and suffering in any form. What does this look like? For Dr. Farmer, it has meant working with his Haitian partners, Zami La Santé, in building a health clinic from the ground up in central Haiti and not turning away a single patient, walking for miles to make house calls to those unable to come to the clinic, providing food and housing to those suffering from hunger and homelessness, and training local staff to expand the services. Relieving pain and suffering wherever it occurs in any form means looking for it in hidden places, including behind the locked doors of prisons, and Farmer's organization, Partners in Health, has done just that in Siberia. Suffering is rampant all over the world where the US has had a strong presence, such as Iraq and Afghanistan, for example, as well as in the Eastern Congo and in Haiti, where the US presence is less obvious. Suffering is also rampant within the US, from the poverty of homelessness and joblessness, lack of medical care, to elevated rates of disease from environmental toxins, to obesity and diabetes from too much unhealthy food being heavily marketed, and to the insidious and debilitating epidemics of stress, anxiety, and loneliness. Since the highest priority of this policy shall be to relieve pain and suffering in any form wherever the U.S. has a presence, U.S. foreign policy can no longer be separated from U.S. domestic policy. And so what we were talking about here is an alternative U.S. policy in its activities both within and beyond its borders. Now let's look at principle number 2. The best possible treatment for any form of pain must be made available to all people equally. What does this look like? For Dr. Farmer, it meant that patients with multi-drug resistant tuberculosis who happen to live in Caraballo, a poor slum on the outskirts of Lima, Peru, or behind bars in Siberian prisons, patients who don't respond to the relatively inexpensive standard tuberculosis treatments deserve to be treated by highly skilled pulmonologists with the expensive second-line drugs that are effective in treating multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, just the same as any well-insured, comfortably situated patient in the US. Farmer has challenged some discriminatory policies that appear in World Health Organization manuals, such as, quote, in settings of resource constraint, it is necessary for rational resource allocation to prioritize TB treatment categories according to the cost effectiveness of treatment in each category, unquote. Or, as another statement puts it more bluntly, quote, in developing countries, people with multi-drug resistant tuberculosis usually die because effective treatment is often impossible in poor countries, unquote. This proposal for U.S. policy affirms that it is unacceptable to implement a two-tiered system of healthcare that cares for some and simply allows others to die. When it comes to physical ailments, not only will the best-known medical treatments and procedures be made available to all, but patients will be able to choose from the best possible of a whole range of healing modalities, including acupuncture, homeopathy, shamanistic rituals, herbal remedies, qigong, etc., that have been refined and practiced successfully in many different cultures. And instead of mandating one-size-fits-all medical solutions that profit big pharma, physicians will be encouraged to challenge standard practices as new research emerges and give patients options while fully disclosing all potential risks and benefits of each option. Those suffering the discomforts of hunger and homelessness will be ensured food and housing at a level that can be guaranteed to all, along with access to dignified employment and a path to self-sufficiency. The best known treatments for mental, emotional, and spiritual pain will also be made available equally to everyone, again, taking a variety of forms, including psychotherapy, yoga, sweat lodges, support groups, spiritual counseling, 12-step programs, and more. For those suffering the pain of unresolved conflict, all manner of traditional and modern mediation and reconciliation processes will be offered, including baraza, mbongi, ho'oponopono, the TRANSCEND method of conflict transformation, and many more. The voices of those who are suffering must be listened to and taken seriously by healers in determining diagnosis, prognosis, and therapy. The bottom line shall be a collective commitment to meet everyone's basic human needs, which will be discussed in greater detail later on when I describe some practical examples of implementing the new policy. How are we going to pay for this? At this point, one might ask, these two principles sound well and good in theory, but will be very expensive and impractical to implement. Who will pay for this? Here is where the power of these principles to bring about a fundamental transformation will occur. In 2009, an Iraqi woman sent an email to some listservs titled "The Iraqi Resistant Responds to President Obama," detailing what the Iraqi resistant wanted at that time. Basically, an end to the US occupation and intervention in the region, and respect for Iraqi dignity and sovereignty, along with related demands. One passage of the document states, quote, "We believe that the funds wasted in this war would have been more useful if it were spent on research to develop alternative energy, which no doubt would have reduced energy conflicts, cures for cancer, agricultural solutions to prevent worldwide poverty, advancements to develop Africa, where people still die of starvation and intentional neglect. Endless causes, all in need of immediate attention," unquote. Does this sound familiar? Many have voiced precisely this belief in the past years of US military madness in Iraq and elsewhere. As the two prongs of the new US policy are implemented, the shift towards devoting available resources to healing as a top priority will of necessity steer resources away from other decidedly unhealthy activities like weapons making, training in lethal use of weapons, torture, resource plundering, material overindulgence, and the list goes on. And a few other ways to generate additional revenues would be via land value taxation, which Alana Hartsock, who's here today, has talked and written extensively about, or public banking, which Ellen Brown, who's here today, is an expert on, or a transaction tax on all of the gazillion stock trades and hedge fund trades that happen every day, which Ellen has also written about. So now let's get to some practical examples. We'll look now at a few different scenarios that will allow us to envision some practical examples of what it might look like to put the new US policy into practice. Remember that the more other countries and regions partner with us in implementing a similar policy, the more effective it will be. But also keep in mind that the following scenarios are mere suggestions, and the responses of the people depicted may actually be different in reality. As TRANSCEND member Kyoko Okamoto pointed out at the symposium in Jondahl, Norway, the portrayal of oppressed people by others can be a way of silencing them and rendering them even more voiceless. That is certainly not my intent. And I'd like to re-emphasize that in healing processes, the voices of the suffering must be heard, and they must play a central role in determining the outcomes. So to continue hypothetically, what could this healing policy look like? As spending on killing machines and violence is phased out, healing centers along the lines of the Venezuelan Barrio Adentro are phased in and soon found throughout the US and also in countries that have suffered from past US policies. Each healing center is staffed 24/7 with local intake clerks skilled in supportive and empathetic counseling techniques and equipped with ample resources for physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and economic healing. We'll start by going to Iraq. Since the top priority for US involvement in Iraq is now healing pain and suffering, all US military and civilian personnel and installations have been withdrawn. Existing US clinics and military bases have been kept in operation for the time being, with large signs that say healing center. All are welcome. Though most Iraqis were delighted to see the departure of the US soldiers and private contractors, they are still rather suspicious of the remaining US staffed healing centers. There is no shortage of people in need of medical treatment, but past experiences tell them not to trust the Americans. Finally, a young Iraqi woman decided to take her middle-aged father, who has chronic kidney disease, to the center. After the intake clerk greeted them warmly, the woman explained that the painful kidney condition was getting worse, and her father would soon die unless he could start dialysis or get a kidney transplant. Unfortunately, however, her local clinic had no dialysis machine and no facilities for doing a transplant, even if they could find a donor. The clerk said she thought the staff at the healing center could probably take care of her father, and invited them into an exam room where the doctor on duty would look at him and make the necessary referrals for treatment. At that moment, the father blurted out, "I won't let an American doctor examine me. That would hurt me even more than the pain of my kidney disease. My son was badly wounded by an American soldier when they raided our neighborhood. Behind the soldiers with guns, I saw a soldier who was a medic, and I screamed at him to help my son. He ignored me, and my son bled to death. Because of that, I cannot trust any American doctors." The intake clerk paused for a moment, acknowledged the man's feelings, and said, "It is our policy to offer you the best treatment available for your condition, just as we would anybody. Clearly, you are in immediate need of dialysis. We can't let you use our dialysis machine here without one of our doctors examining you first. But since part of any best possible treatment is being seen by a health practitioner the patient trusts, it's also clear that you should continue in the care of your Iraqi doctor. What we'll have to do is get your doctor a dialysis machine. In fact, the one we have here hasn't been used for a while, so we'll arrange to have it transferred to your local clinic." Before long, more and more people came to the healing centers run by the US in Iraq. But the funny thing is, no one ended up being treated there. Instead, more and more US resources were directed to equipping and funding Iraqi medical facilities. Before the woman and her father left the healing center, the intake clerk asked if there was anything else. The woman said, "Yes, there is. Now I need to tell you about my condition that badly needs treatment. I am suffering a great wound to my dignity since the US invaded my country, and even longer because of the sanctions before that. I have lost my brother and several other relatives and neighbors to this war. My community has been destroyed. The pain of knowing what a thriving and culturally rich community we could have, and seeing how so much of that has been lost is almost unbearable." The clerk acknowledged her feelings and asked for a moment to ascertain what options for treatment might be available. The clerk conferred with her coworker, who had heard about post-conflict trauma, and suggested some sort of reconciliation process was called for. "You'll want to bring in Johann Galtung for that one. He's the expert." As time went on, more and more people came to the center with the exact same affliction. The collective suffering of Iraqis for many years of an unwanted war had been devastating. Galtung was invited to help the affected parties launch a deep and far-reaching truth and reconciliation process that eventually involved willing participation by different factions in Iraq, as well as representatives from neighboring countries and those that had been part of the US invasion and occupation. At first, representatives of the US hesitated to participate. The only reason they were doing this healing thing was in Iraq anyway, was because they still wanted to get access to the country's oil. And Iraqis at this point were so resentful that they had nullified all agreements with US oil companies made during the war. Galtung asked, "If you participate sincerely in this process, listening to the Iraqis with respect, acknowledging what they've been through, and accepting some responsibility for repairing the damage, do you think they will then agree to sell you some of their oil on reasonable terms?" The truth and reconciliation process began. It was long and difficult. Much pain was acknowledged, responsibility taken, and resentments finally let go. The US ended up giving a small fraction of what it would have spent on the continued military occupation towards allowing Iraqis to rebuild and fully address any pain and suffering themselves. The US accepted responsibility and earned respect. Iraqi oil was made available on terms that reflected the full cost of capturing this valuable commodity. The US was now a partner, not a dominator. Shia and Sunni resistance fighters acknowledged their role in causing some of the suffering as well, and affirmed a commitment to nonviolence in pursuing liberation and empowerment. Iraq joined the other member states of the Organization of the Islamic Community in convening the Abdul Ghaffar Khan Annual Conference on Security Cooperation, named in honor of the legendary nonviolent soldier of Islam, Abdul Ghaffar Khan, a contemporary of Gandhi, who led the Pathan people of what is now the border region of Afghanistan and Pakistan in nonviolent resistance to the British Empire. Thus, the dialogue on healing and meeting basic needs, which form the basis for true security and cooperation, continues. Now let's move to the Eastern Congo. The US presence in Eastern Congo is much less visible than Iraq, but it is significant nonetheless. The wide variety of mineral resources found there are necessary to supply the US consumer society with electronic gadgets. Therefore, all activities around securing precious minerals for US corporations, whether by official diplomatic channels, often involving bribery, or via the US puppet regime in Rwanda, which is engaged in covert training of arming of militias to plunder minerals and smuggle them out, all of this has been suspended in order to address the urgent need for healing. The cumulative suffering from abject poverty and warfare following centuries of exploitation is so overwhelming in this region that other countries involved in exploiting mineral resources could no longer ignore it and have joined the US in adopting the policy prioritizing healing. Healing centers were opened in numerous locations, and here is a typical example of what one of them looked like. The healing center is located near a refugee camp in the North Kivu province. The moment its doors opened, a long line of visibly ailing people stretched for miles, waiting for treatment. Common afflictions were treatable infectious disease and trauma from the low-intensity warfare raging over land and mineral resources, involving personal injuries, loss of loved ones, displacement, and rape. Many suffered the pain of hunger and seeing their children go hungry. They suffered from the indignity of being driven off their land and not having a permanent home or being able to provide for their family. The worst pain came from disintegration of their communities and an assault on their dignity, going back to the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade, King Leopold's brutality, and continuing to the present exploitation of corporate globalization. The staff agreed that the few doctors among them should start treating physical afflictions immediately. But meanwhile, how to determine the best way to approach the larger issues? A few of the Congolese in line heard this discussion, and an elder called out, "We need to have a baraza." "What's that?" asked the intake clerk. The Congolese elder explained how a baraza, also called mbongi in Western Congo, is a method of communal conflict resolution and problem solving, in which everyone has a voice, all are seen as equal participants, and all possibilities are explored. The baraza was convened, and after a few days, the elder came to the healing center staff to present their collective conclusions. "We need to have more doctors and healers immediately. The few of you are doing what you can, but too many of us are dying before they can be treated. We would like as many Congolese doctors as possible to be brought here and more of them trained. We need a space for our traditional healers to practice and train others. We suggest you bring in doctors from Cuba, as we know that they are ready and willing to come in large numbers. Cuba has shown us a good example of prioritizing healing, both in their own country and among those suffering most around the world. For those suffering from emotional and spiritual trauma, including rape victims and soldiers who have been conditioned and armed by foreigners to perpetrate atrocities, We need space for our traditional healers to practice intensive interventions with community support. Along with medical care, we need food and housing. In Haiti, they say that to give medicines without food is like lave mains siete. In other words, washing your hands and then wiping them dry in the dirt. We have people here who are capable of building houses and growing food. We can do this if you provide salaries and land to get us started. Finally, and perhaps most important, over a century of self-serving propaganda by colonial missionaries and teachers has robbed us of our identity and connection to our culturally rich African past, going back millennia, including the ancient civilization of Egypt. Learning our own history and reestablishing our identity is a crucial part of the social healing we need. The Healing Center staff were aghast at the enormity of this proposal. The US and its corporations were tempted to simply pull out of the Congo, but at the same time, they didn't want to let go of the highly lucrative mineral resources. The intake clerk recalled seeing a picture in her local newspaper in 2005, right after Hurricane Katrina, showing a large room full of Cuban doctors ready to go to New Orleans to help out. They were nearly all young, brown, and black-skinned women. That offer had been rejected by President Bush at the time, but perhaps they should now be invited. The strategies of more doctors and communal healing spaces, along with provision of food and housing via money and salaries and land, were pursued. And before long, a thriving village had been created that was able to sustain itself economically. As an added benefit, the rate of infectious disease dropped dramatically. Everyone was engaged in supporting each other and promoting the healing concept through numerous avenues, including the arts, education, and ongoing barazas to find creative and innovative ways to overcome difficulties. Ultimately, a large-scale reconciliation process had to be initiated, involving Congolese people from all walks of life, executives from the mining, logging, and weapons corporations that profited from the people's suffering, and representatives of the governments, including the US, that participated in enabling such an unacceptable situation. The TRANSCEND African Network of the Great Lakes region and the Otabenga Center for Peace, Healing, and Dignity in Kinshasa made the arrangements for this extensive truth and reconciliation process that addressed deep wounds going back hundreds of years. Extensive reparations were made so that the Congolese could implement a wide range of social, economic, and environmental transformations that met everyone's needs in a sustainable way. And now that the Congolese had reconnected with their true African identity, they heeded the advice of the ancestors, not to sell off all of their natural resources right away, but to tap into them slowly, a little bit each generation, for industries they devised themselves for their own use, with any excess being available for export. The rest of Africa did the same. Now we're going to go to Haiti. Oh, wait, I'm not through with Congo. One more thing about Congo. Corrupt local officials and middlemen acknowledged their role in causing some of the suffering as well, and affirmed a commitment to nonviolent solidarity in pursuing liberation and empowerment. The Congo joined other members of the African Union in convening the Kimpa Vita Annual Conference on Security and Cooperation, named in honor of Kimpa Vita, a Congolese woman who started nonviolent actions to resist transatlantic slavery and was burned at the stake at the age of 22 in 1706 by Catholic priests. Thus, the dialogue on healing and meeting basic needs and finding new possibilities for the future continues. And now we'll go to Haiti. As with the Eastern Congo, the US presence in Haiti is nearly invisible. Its presence, nonetheless, has a long history, beginning with the United States consternation over Haiti's successful slave rebellion in 1791 to 1804. After all, if Haitian slaves can free themselves, maybe US slaves could try the same. This was followed by its refusal to recognize the Republic of Haiti for 60 years until the 1860s, when slaves were finally freed in the US. and its use of gunboat diplomacy to extort money from the fledgling nation, its overt military occupation of Haiti from 1915 to 1934, its support of the brutal Duvalier dictatorships from 1957 to 1986, to its involvement to 2 coups d'etat, overthrowing the wildly popular and democratically elected Jean-Bertrand Aristide in 1991 and again in 2004. Soon after, the US helped engineer the February 29, 2004 coup d'etat, kidnapped Aristide, and installed a puppet government accompanied by US Marines. The US forces eventually withdrew and were replaced by a surrogate international occupation force wearing blue helmets, which remains in various forms to this day. Since then, the US has been behind the scenes, undermining democracy, fomenting violence, and maintaining the status quo of gross wealth inequality. But just what is the US interest? There are tangible factors, such as maintaining a large pool of desperately poor people near the US to be used as cheap labor for assembly plants, as well as potential natural resource exploitation of gold, copper, oil, natural gas, and other minerals. But an underlying interest that seems obvious, but is just not talked about, is making sure an all-Black nation with a tradition of defying white international powers is never seen as successful and thriving. This makes implementing the priority of healing especially complicated. In fact, the US decided it could not bring itself to prioritize healing over its other interests in Haiti and simply let them all go. UN troops withdrew, business interests evaporated, and the Haitians can manage on their own and against all odds. If they succeed, so be it. If not, that's so be it. And you know what? The Haitians did make it. Many of the wealthy elites left the country, and the poor majority quickly elected wise leaders who worked with grassroots community activists to restore the gains and continue the gains made by the Lavalas movement from 1994 to 2004 in the areas of housing, education, healthcare, adult literacy, land reform, agricultural, and local industries. The University of the Aristide Foundation, established in 2011 by former President Jean-Bertrand Aristide, grew and expanded, providing training in a variety of fields for young Haitians to build their country's future. Healing villages, similar to the one described earlier in Eastern Congo, sprung up everywhere. The minimum wage was raised, and with a relatively small amount of initial assistance from friends around the world, Haiti was finally able to follow through on the promise of the 1804 revolution, empowering its people to create innovative, supportive communities and to engage on an equal basis with other countries. Instead of being referred to as the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, and actually, I never called it that. I always said it was the most robbed country in the Western Hemisphere. Haiti became a respected model for others to emulate, not unlike its very close neighbor and ally, Cuba. Soon, throughout the Caribbean and Latin America, January 1st became a major holiday, commemorating the Haitian Revolution and establishment of the Free Republic of Haiti on January 1st, 1804, and the assistance Haiti gave to Simón Bolívar in his campaign to liberate South America from colonial masters. Before long, other countries throughout the world began celebrating January 1st as a global day of liberation. Finally, even the US, no longer an empire, but a member and partner in the family of nations, joined in and proclaimed January 1st its new national holiday, replacing July 4th. Now we're going to go to Richmond, California, where I am right now. I'll now share briefly 2 examples of what its implementation of this alternative US policy could look like inside the United States. First, let's go to my hometown of Richmond, California, a place most of you have probably never heard of. next door to the more renowned intellectual center with the University of Berkeley. Richmond, on the other hand, has a reputation for being low income, high in crime, and generally undesirable, although this has been changing in the last 20 years through successful grassroots initiatives to reduce violent crime and uplift the community. One finds here both poverty and affluence flanking a world-class core. Flanking a working class core. Home to a multi-billion-dollar oil refinery and surrounded by the opulence of the San Francisco Bay Area, Richmond traditionally has been stigmatized by the dominant cultural narrative. Whoever takes the time to get to know the community, however, will find a wealth of human spirit in its colorful bouquet of races and ethnicities that is engaging and infectious. The policy of prioritizing healing was well received by Richmond residents, many of whom have suffered from decades of poverty, racial discrimination, and toxic pollution from the oil refinery and other heavy industries. As soon as the healing centers opened, unemployed residents were put to work both in the healing professions and in building housing for the homeless, beautifying blighted neighborhoods, and expanding community gardens on vacant lots to provide healthy food for the neighbors. Countless young people were trained and hired as counselors, therapists, support group leaders, mediators, and reconciliation facilitators to assist those suffering from, as well as those responsible for, the lingering emotional pain of racism, broken families, financial stress, and social isolation. Now that the US was no longer engaged in empire building, the resources to accomplish this were readily available. As the population healed, it became more and more empowered to advocate for public health and the environmental justice. The oil refinery in the city, owned by one of the world's wealthiest corporations, had in the past used its money to control the local government, avoid paying its fair share of taxes, and hide the extent of avoidable pollution from its operations. Those living nearby had elevated rates of cancer, asthma, and heart disease. Richmond, located on the San Francisco Bay, is a very windy city, and the solution soon became clear. Replace the aging refinery with a wind farm and a research station for capturing energy from waves and tides. Richmond became a peaceful, healthy Mecca, a popular destination welcoming visitors from all over the world. And now we'll go to Washington, D.C., where Ellen, who's with us today, resides. Not Ellen, Diane. Diane resides in Washington, D.C. Finally, let's go to the belly of the beast and take a look at a healing center in Washington, D.C. The intake clerk on duty is a tall, fair-skinned gentleman with longish, somewhat wavy white hair and keen blue eyes. If you listen closely, you'll note the faint remnants of a Norwegian accent. The intake clerk has just arrived at work, so let's listen in. Here come the suits and ties again. That's all we seem to see these days. Last year, it was refugees and immigrants. The year before, descendants of African slaves. And before that, Native Americans. Those were the ones who mostly came to the center. The men in suits and ties who came to the healing center that day suffered from a variety of ailments that all shared a common theme. Corporations were no longer making excessive profits, and the stock market had flatlined. Former CEOs, bankers, insurance company executives, real estate speculators, tech titans, and heirs to family fortunes were exceedingly distressed. The first patient that morning said to the white-haired intake clerk, "If this is a healing center and everybody is supposed to be welcome, then try healing me. I've lost my fortune. I had to sell my country estate, and now my mansion in town is being foreclosed. To top it off, I can't make the payments on my Porsche, so I had to actually take the metro here today. The shame of it all is unbearable. What can you do for me? If I don't get my money back, I don't know how I can go on living. The clerk replied in his kindly, grandfatherly tone, there, sit down and let's talk about this. You are indeed most welcome here. I can see that you are extremely upset about the turn your life has taken and the situation you're in. Of course, we will take care of you, like we take care of everyone who walks in our doors. Let me get a little more information from you first. Do you have any money left at all? Is there enough to feed your family and keep a roof over your heads? The intake clerk asked a few more questions and listened carefully to the answers, and then explained to the patient the best known treatment plan for his ailment. My dear sir, our experience and research have shown that simply giving large sums of money to people who have lost fortunes does not cure what hurts them the most. Besides, even if we believed that giving you $1 million would heal your pain, we'd have to give $1 million to everyone who came to us complaining of money problems, since our policy states that the best known treatment has to be made available to everyone equally. We'd quickly run out of money and be back where we started. What we do guarantee to every person, however, is that your basic human needs will be met. And based on your answers to my questions, I've been able to do a basic needs assessment for you, from which I conclude that you are suffering from a clear case of identity crisis. Again, based on the experience and research initially carried out by the TRANSCEND network, basic human needs fall into 4 general categories. Number 1, survival. I've ascertained that your immediate survival is under no threat. You do not have an acute life-threatening illness or injury. You're not in a war zone, and you are not facing an impending natural disaster. So you're okay here. Number 2, well-being. Your general well-being is quite well intact. You have enough money and earning capability to feed your family with delicious, healthy food, though perhaps not at 5-star restaurants daily, to acquire a decent, sturdy home, though perhaps not one with 6 bathrooms and a 4-car garage, and to clothe yourselves comfortably and stylishly, though perhaps not with designer fashions. Healthcare, education, and cultural enrichment are provided to you and your family amply by the greater community. Your relationship with your wife could use a bit of work, and for that, I'll refer you to an excellent marriage counselor who is so effective that after a few sessions, you won't even think about visiting those high-priced call girls anymore. Number 3, freedom. You may think you have no way out, but if you look closely around you, you'll see that you still have the ability to make many choices in your life. How you came here today, for example, you chose to take the metro. You could also have asked for a ride with your neighbor who commutes here every day. And you have many choices of employment to sustain yourself and your family now that you can no longer live off the earnings from your old stock and bond portfolio. You could enter one of the many healing, building, feeding, creating, or innovative professions that all serve to make others' lives better. With the talents and skills you have, this will be no problem. The salary may be modest, but more than adequate, and job satisfaction is guaranteed. Number 4, identity. Identity is the 4th category of basic human needs, and this is where you need the most attention. You used to see yourself as a self-made man, a pillar of society, a philanthropist, the embodiment of the American dream. Now that identity is shattered and you don't know who you are. For you, we have a very special program that will enlighten you about the deep culture and deep structures that shaped your original identity. You will learn how your original identity affected other people, both here and in other parts of the world. After much reflection and deep introspection, you will emerge with renewed empathy for yourself and your fellow human beings. You will become aware of the deep interconnectedness of all living things. You will learn to find joy in your relationships and the beauty that surrounds you. In this process, you will redefine your identity in ways that you cannot imagine today, but that will be deeply fulfilling in the future. The man in the suit was speechless. No one had ever spoken to him like this, not even at church. A feeling of relief washed over him, and he sensed that there was, after all, light at the end of the tunnel. And so the day proceeded with more men in suits until the last patient of the day appeared, this time a woman. She had warm eyes, deep brown skin, and an ageless quality. The intake clerk immediately sensed that she was different from all the other patients, and yet there was something of everyone in her. She smiled and said, "I came here many years ago when I was in extreme pain and wanted to come back to tell you that I'm starting to feel better. My name, you see, is Mother Earth. Before the policy of healing was instituted, I was being severely battered and abused by those interminable freeways and parking lots, nuclear weapons testing sites, military bases, factories producing useless objects made from materials ripped out of me in open pit mines, and raped by fracking operations. The air and water I give of so freely in order to sustain life were being poisoned. Some people were trying their best to take care of me, but couldn't keep up with the destructive forces. Things changed when people started making healing their first priority, offering the best treatment available to everyone equally. And people are now much more aware of the consequences of their actions on future generations. They know that without a healthy earth, life for humans will not be possible. And they are coming together to take responsibility for healing the wounds that have been inflicted on me. The US used to mock and make fun of me, but what is left of the US empire, the US empire used to mock and make fun of me, but what is left of the US, no longer an empire, now respects me and is willing to fully participate in my continued healing process. The intake clerk expressed appreciation to Mother Earth for visiting him in person and assured her that we should have been listening to her all along. Humans used to listen to me all the time, she replied. Now they're listening again. Thank you. That's the end.
Great stories. Thanks,
Thank you
Marilyn.
so much, Marilyn. That was great. And I found myself going, yes, yes, a number of places. And it was very well done. Thank you.
When
Anyone have any questions or comments? Ellen?
when you mentioned Michael Jackson and Heal the World, and his last two videos, I don't remember what the name of the other one was, but it was him marching through the streets in Nairobi. Do you remember? And they were followed by hundreds of Africans. And soon after, he died mysteriously of drug overdose, and there was some suspicion of his doctor being implicated. Anyway, so I saw, conspiracy theory stuff about that. I mean, if you can imagine Michael Jackson leading a movement through Africa, so you can see where that would be a threat. And it looked to me like that conspiracy theory had some validity.
Thanks for mentioning that, Ellen. As a matter of fact, I originally prepared this presentation in the summer of 2009, and right at the time that Michael Jackson died. And so a lot of his music was being played, and that's where that heal the world, that phrase resonated with me. And so that's how I developed the whole broader topic with a lot of other inputs from other sources as well.
Yeah, it's a great piece of writing. Thanks.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you. I've always felt that if we could just redirect the resources from killing, destroying, controlling towards healing, that's what we need. Although I must admit that I think in the wake of the pandemic that we've seen the weaponization of healthcare. So how do we change the paradigm within the healthcare system so that it's not overtly, destructive. I mean, such a huge challenge.
Oh, that's it. It's name it and claim it. I think really that's exactly where we are, is name it and claim it. We have to enough of us have to step forward and declare something new into being. This is really what the founding fathers did. And a lot of that was, tremendous impetus was given by Thomas Paine's Common Sense, which was published in February of 1776. So, and then it swept the colonies like wildfire. And it got enough people on board that saying that, King George is our king, but King George is actually descended from thugs who came from France and, took over the country. And we can do our own thing. So, I think we're really at that point. And as I understand it, in the research I did preparing my TEDx talk, which was almost 7 years ago now, we have the majority now. We are the majority. And even at the time of the American Revolution, only about 50% of the people were ever supporting the revolution. So it really doesn't take that much to get it going. What you need is a message that is so compelling. And I think that the healing message is, I actually synopsize this, and I'll talk about this next week, into universal super health in one generation. So if you take a generation of 20 years, if we set as a goal for America and invite others to join us around the world in this goal, universal super health in one generation is healing, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physically. All people were what referred to as 100% successful humanity. There are people who've said this in all different ways. And it's our time now to come up with a way to communicate this clearly and simply, and in a way that's a call to action and invites people to come in, and then has a process for entering this new world that we're creating together. Because there's so many things going on out there, as each one of you knows.
The only thing is, how do we break the big money? I mean, I just don't see how we get rid of them. They've got control and we don't have any control over them.
I don't agree, because remember what the American revolutionaries did? They created in 1775, I believe it was in the summer, they created continental dollars. And continental dollars were basically the same thing they'd been doing until colonial script was outlawed, where they were running off dollars, continental dollars on the printing presses. And they did this, they washed in the American Revolution washed in on a hyperinflated tidal wave of these continental dollars. And basically the idea is, you like the new story that we're proposing, you like the new game we're proposing of breaking away from England. And instead of the story being King George is our king, King George is a jerk. And if you like the new story, you like the new game, come play and recognize these dollars as real, accept them in exchange for, and we can create, actually, I believe, with the context we have and the knowledge we have now, we can create a new money system that's actually backed by value. And that is definitely, I mean, right now they're about to push at the end of July, sounds like going to be the first salvos for the digital central bank digital currencies, which are basically endless printing on the printing, creating digital stuff by, putting numbers in the computer. And then if you've been naughty or nice, you get them or you don't get them. And so, I think there's going to be a way to describe this where you can say, people, you got a choice here. You can go this way or you can go this way. If you go this way, good luck. We don't think it's a very good direction. We think there's a cliff up ahead, or you can come this way with us and we can create something new, something that we all dream of deep in our hearts, which is a world that works for everyone.
Yeah, and I think that's right. I think Ellen and I agree. It's a huge challenge about the money. I do think the public bank movement that you're so involved with is one way to get away from the concentration of the power that the banks have. And then also look at what's happening in other parts of the world where they're, turning away from the dollar. I think ending the dollar hegemony will also, create a shift. And just going back to what you said earlier, Carol, and then also Nori, about the healing, I think we need to find a way to reclaim the concept of healing and don't let it be co-opted and weaponized by the medical establishment. We need to look at what healing is and make sure it's open and there's all possibilities included there, because I'm not talking about the kind of healing that was, imposed upon us by big pharma during the COVID times, but the kind of, holistic healing that looks at all possibilities and really, really does address all aspects of people's needs.
Where radiation and chemotherapy were actually derived from war weapons, World War I.
Yeah.
And yeah, most of the chemicals from the war weapons, they wanted to repurpose these. And that's where, the Flexner report and the whole Rockefeller impetus for, taking these and repurposing these drugs to help our health. Yes, indeedy.
I think Diane wants to say something.
Okay. First of all, that was beautiful. It was brilliant and a work of art. And I found myself being unable to distinguish between fantasy and reality. So, I like when you were describing the beginning healing centers, I felt like they were actually happening. So they're plausible. And also healing means making whole. So just a few specific points. I've often thought and said that our foreign policy, our policies are about inflicting suffering, and they're sadistic, like sanctions and whatever, that they're inflicting and punishing people. The other thing you said, one of your things was to send the military away and to bring in healers, but I think we could also like retrain parts of the military for the life force. And I was thinking like during Somalia, whatever it was, that they were feeding people instead of killing people. And they really wanted to do that. And there are people that join the military because they want to do good. So maybe like for while they're there, that there could be like a special force, metaforce or life force within and like the global nonviolent peace force that could be trained in healing, and that they would love to do that. Also, Eve Ensler has villages for like women who've been raped. I forget, she has the name Cities of Joy, maybe it's called. So there's a model of something that exists. In Disclosure Conference, they talked about all these inventions that could provide abundant energy for very little. So say just to tweak the vision, like in addition to like solar and wind, that there say upcoming inventions that might be more efficient than solar and wind. The other thing is the whistleblower conference is coming up. And years ago, there's a guy who's also going to be there this year, Dr. Moskowitz, who there's a way to treat kidney disease without dialysis that has been suppressed, just like all the whistleblower that have been censored and retaliated against. And because they want to keep people dependent on the system, they don't want people to be able to heal themselves privately. So, I'll find out more information about it. I don't remember, it was years ago and he's coming back, but there are alternatives to dialysis. And the woman who came in who felt afflicted, the word that I would give to that is betrayal, and that everyone's been betrayed. And I like the image of the TRC and bringing in the TRANSCEND method. And just one more brief thing, that Marianne Williamson has a clip that I saw recently where they asked how we're going to pay for it, and she talked about it. Went on, it's a short thing about all the money that we throw away on bad things, and hopefully Bobby Kennedy has some solutions to this. So anyway, I think it was a really beautiful, coherent work of art, and I would like to promote it widely. So thank you. That's all.
Thank you. I think Alana, did you want to say something?
Yes, thank you, Marilyn. I like your visionary approach in that you went Congo, Haiti, Richmond, and DC, and certainly connecting the dots. They may look like very different places, but I think when you look at the power, land, and money problems, you're going to be able to see that the dots are pretty well connected. There's healing camps. Bobby Kennedy is now calling for healing camps for drug addicts, where they can be in the country, in rural areas, eating organic food and growing organic food. So he's envisioning these all over the United States. So here we have a major voice calling for what you're calling for, Marilyn. And if it's for addicts, I mean, he talks transparently about how he was addicted for like 14 years and his own family issues. So what a great guy he is to be coming forward. The vision of some of these corporate types sitting down at the table, you're going to get a few, but Marilyn, I think we have to be realistic. We're up against psychopaths. Psychopaths don't just convert. They don't listen to reason. They're not going to play nice. I've been also immersed in Prout philosophy, progressive utilization theory. And they say that for the psychopaths, if you can't get them rehab, you have to get them out of the way. And this is where we do need to have some force, in my view, to arrest them, first to have them under trial. Citizens courts, like maybe Kevin Annette calls for, if the justice system isn't working. And citizen arrests, these guys have to be outed for the criminal psychopaths that they are. They cannot be allowed to keep controlling the earth, land, and resources. Ellen's concerned about, Ellen, you bring this up, but how can it happen? It's like, oh, it's just so much arrayed against us power-wise. But I want to again emphasize that in the third largest city of Pennsylvania, Allentown, the people were educated enough door to door that they twice voted in to freeze all other taxes and only to have land value tax. That's a vote in of economic democracy that we can do in our localities. We can keep getting the people educated, and the potential for building some sort of cooperation between the public banks people of Ellen's networks and the land value tax people of mine has really enormous power, especially as we bring forth the information that the Jubilee Justice, the perennial wisdom teachings are all about. Public banks, no usury. Am I okay now? No usury and fair land rights. That's the perennial wisdom teaching. As we really bring this forward, that's going to be another very strong basis for movement building beyond right, left, for addressing wealth inequality. Marilyn.
If we had a fair election, sure. But in Allentown, they were not dealing with Dominion voting machines. I mean, I've seen numerous experts now saying we may not even have an election. And if we have an election, it's not going to be a fair election. And they're going to railroad their people in like they always do. And I just don't, I mean, it does seem to me like there's some pretty powerful opponents out there that we can't, I mean, like you say, they're not rational, but they're not gonna, we can't reason this way.
This is the basis for a discussion on big power in all its dimensions. And there is movements for decentralizing from the big power structures and Dominion voting. If you have a local community that's not counting on those machines, that's counting the votes directly, then you start having some local power and control. I see these local power centers with the clarity about decentralization popping up all over the place. Marilyn, again, if we ask the question, who owns the earth, who owns the land, and we start getting people onto projects of land value mapping, who owns what land, where, how much is it valued, how much would they pay to everybody under commons rent policy, then we have a basis for a land rights and a money movement. We can help educate people about how to do this new, very transparent technology to do this. And lastly, and Ginger was on our call, she's been attending our Equinox Earth Day calls at 11 o'clock Mondays, and others of you are interested. We're moving towards the 2024 March equinox, building it up as large as possible based on John McConnell, the founder of Equinox Earth Day's vision of earth rights. He understood both the land and money problems and what to do about it. That's never been brought forth in the 50 years that the bell for peace has been rung at the United Nations on the equinox. But we have a core to move forward on this now. And I would love to have a conversation with you, Marilyn, on how we can have a very major focus on Haiti, because you've been involved in Haiti for a long, long time. You're already connected. Let's build out a really big vision and strong networks and support for the people of Haiti with the biggest ideas we can come up with Transcend's conflict resolution, with looking at the land and money problem. Let's do that, Marilyn, and let's have that as I became a photograph of people in Haiti celebrating the Equinox Earth Day. I don't know if I mailed them to you, but there's already that. So let's get Haiti people educated and committed to Equinox Earth Day, and we all help Haiti in particular. And we've been talking about having position papers as a kind of a shadow U.S. State Department think tank. And there's Diane in the midst of Brookings and all these great think tanks she's connected with. So let's envision having our biggest and best ideas with a focus on Haiti, come up with a great deal of clarity, working with people in Haiti.
Okay, can I get a word in edgewise here
How about
sometime
that, Marilyn?
soon, please?
I'm finished.
Okay, great. I just wanted to say, Marilyn, I really appreciate the detail that you went through in the imagination, because the imagination, nothing can be manifest unless it's imagined. It has to be imagined if we're going to manifest anything. And the work that you went through to put together to flesh out a whole imagined reality with this new vibration, with this healing vibration is extraordinarily profound. It's a lot of work to do all that imagination. You have to really get into the nitty-gritty. You have to really feel it. You have to really think it through in detail. And while, of course, it's a new process for most people to spend time imagining the future in detail, when it's so much easier to look at the problems. But for you to focus on what a solution actually looks like and applied gives feedback to the whole collective. It's like you're the remedy. You're like a homeopathic remedy here, putting together the picture, the vibration, the circumstances of a future. And the more that people can look at that and imagine that and feel that and own that as being something that they desire, something they want, I think the more it'll get into the zeitgeist, the more it'll percolate into the whole collective mind field, and we can get more and more people with solutions, more and more people dreaming up how the love and the beauty and the love, beauty, and truth are working for us, and how we can harness that for ourselves and for our world. So you're doing a magnificent piece of work here. And I really just want to let you know that I think that this is, when I see it, the hardest thing for people to do is to stay focused on, oh, what is it going to look like? What's it going to feel like? What is that future really there? So you can set a path, so you can hook yourself to your star and get that future track aligned correctly, aligned to a more beautiful thing. It's really interesting because Ellen sent out a link of a sweet psychic woman talking about different aspects about life in the future. And she was pointing out what I was talking about when I did my presentation, is that each person who can actually anchor into the frequency and the resonance of the future and imagine it and dream it and so on, is really holding an anchor for the rest of all of us. So we can all head in that direction. And as well as if you align your own personal track to that future, then then we creating our own reality, then we're creating, we're really bringing the whole world along with us. So Marilyn, thank you so much for doing all that work of detailing out and imagining and so on. Thank you.
That's good, Ginger. Thank you for that.
That's
You know,
great.
I just want to say that Johann Galtung, when he does mediations and dialogues, he does usually dialogues separately with each conflict party. The first question he always asks is, tell me, what does the city or country or neighborhood or community that you want to live in look like 20 years from now? So he invites people to do that imagining right up front.
Or marriage,
Okay.
or marriage, or Middle East. What is the Middle East you would like to live in?
Right, right.
What is
Fantastic.
what is the relationship that you want to have with your partner? What is, your children?
Exactly.
It's the vision. It's really the vision, and that we,
Froze. You froze, Nori.
Nori, maybe turn off your video so we can hear your audio.
can then,
Okay.
when we hold that, as you said, Ginger, when we hold that steadily. Did I freeze just then?
Yes,
Yeah, quite a long time.
we said, turn off your video.
Okay, I have a question. Ellen, would you like to present this coming week?
No, I'm sorry. I just don't have time. I don't really have time to do these things, but
So should we stop the record?
I also don't have the solution. I'm still working on the solution.
Shall we stop the recording for now? And thank you everybody for watching.
Yeah.
Anyone have any final thing to say before you stop the recording? Or Nori, do you want to have a conclusion or something?
I just thank you very much, Marilyn. It was a very inspiring presentation. I'd love to get a copy of, I think you have a printed copy.
It's kind of scribbled over a lot, but I can clean it up. Yeah.
That would be lovely to see. I would really like to, look at it, because there's so many things that you mentioned that dovetail with things that I'm going to be talking about. So I guess then anyone else have a comment or a